For me, to live intentionally is to recognize that I am the author of my own story.
This is Intentionally Ever After. Join intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek for a series of personal conversations and coaching sessions with various people about how living with intention shows up for them.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Intentionally Ever After. Today, I am delighted to be chatting with the dear, wonderful Elise Seyfried. Elise, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Wow, dear wonderful. What a great way to start. I appreciate the words.
Well, I appreciate you. Yeah. Elise,
yes,
will you kindly introduce yourself to folks, please?
I would be very, very happy to. My name is Elise Seyfried, and I am a mom of 5 kids, a grandma of 2 wonderful little boys. I am also a writer, a freelance writer. I've written 5 books and many freelance articles. I'm an actor and a producer. My husband and I have our own children's theater company. And for 20 years, I was a spiritual formation director at a Philadelphia area Lutheran church. I recently retired, and now I am writing full time, which is a little scary, but also a lot of fun. Yeah.
That does sound fun. More fun than scary.
Yeah.
But I'm not the one doing it, so I can appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. Elise, what I'd like to do is kind of do a rapid fire of the main questions here. And then afterwards, you and I can dig in a little bit deeper, if that works for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, then here we go. Elise Seyfried, what does it mean to live intentionally?
For me, to live intentionally is to recognize that I am the author of my own story.
What is one change in habit that has had an exponential payoff?
About 12 years ago, I began blogging, and I blog very intentionally once a week. I write a 500-word essay about a variety of subjects, and it's what I'm thinking. It's a wonderful discipline for me. I've written 600, 500-word essays, and they've been just a fabulous practice for me in every way.
What have you said no to that has made a significant impact in your life?
For me, I think saying no when it's time to go, knowing when it's time to stop. And that included acting when I got to be a little too old to play Cinderella, just a little tricky. And when I decided to retire from church, I knew when it was time. I knew when to say goodbye.
What area in your life feels just about perfect?
Ooh. Well, my stock answer is that I live a perfectly imperfect life. So I would say there's not much that's totally perfect, except for my grandson, 6-year-old Peter and 8-year-old Aiden. They are absolutely perfect. But then that's just me talking.
No, that's great. That's the official answer now for everybody. Who is someone you admire, and what do you admire about them?
I would have to say Jane Pauley, of all people, the news anchor. She, to me, has lived a wonderfully exciting, but also, again, very intentional and very wonderful life. I admire her greatly. I especially admire her openness about her bipolar disorder, which is something that I also live with.
What do you imagine some people admire about you?
I would say that they probably admire the fact that I am pretty open, sharing my story, all the ups and downs of my life. And one of the things that makes me the proudest is when some church folks tell me that their kids look up to me and want to be like me. And that's like my proudest moments, or when that doesn't happen a lot, but when it happens, it's the best.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Elise. This concludes the rapid fire portion of today's conversation.
Okay. Yay.
Yay. Thank you. Well, tons of intriguing comments in there. So I'm very excited to dig in a little bit. So the first one, the main question, what does it mean to live intentionally? And you referenced being the author of your own story.
Absolutely. what I go back to is my childhood, as we all do, as we all tend to do. And my forebears were all Irish and great storytellers. My grandparents, my mom, wonderful stories. However, in particular, my mom lived a very disordered life. She was not intentional. She sort of let life happen to her. And I watched that as I grew up, and I was a participant in that, an unwilling participant as a child, where my dad lost jobs and we'd have to move and move again. And it just seemed like everything was always out of control, slightly or a lot. And so from a very young age, I decided that would not be my lot, and I would make choices, as many choices as I could possibly make, for the way my life would go. And it hasn't always worked out, but I have always felt that I had some agency that I think my poor mom never felt she had.
Yeah, that's a powerful lesson, right? Growing up. I mean, certainly some people, I would imagine, could embrace the fact that I have no agency, I have no control. I guess this is how life is.
Yeah.
But you decided, no, this isn't my takeaway. My takeaway is I am going to be in control of my destiny, whether it works out or not, right? There are certain external things, but
right.
It's a pretty great takeaway. When would you say that you felt empowered to take ownership, to have agency? When did you feel like you could control?
Okay, well, the very first time I remember controlling anything was my mom was a chain smoker. Both my parents were. And my mom hated to cook and never cooked because she couldn't taste anything. And when I was around 9 years old, I decided that was not the way I wanted to live. And I started cooking for the family. And when I was 10 years old, my mom gave me a copy of The Joy of Cooking. And she said, have at it. You are now the cook for the family. And I remember feeling so empowered and so terrific that there I am at 10 years old, planning the family menus and cooking, doing all the cooking, which when I look back on it, I think, wow, what a cushy thing for my mom. But for me, you're right. She's off the hook there. But I remember that as an early example of feeling empowered to make some changes in my life.
Yeah.
Just the
Do you
first
still have that? Do you still have that copy of The Joy of Cooking?
I do.
Do you? I thought you might.
Oh my gosh, you can't even use it anymore because it's falling apart. But no, I still do have it.
Yeah, that's great. It's a good reference, reference for reminding yourself that you can always empower yourself at any given moment, right? Yeah. That's fabulous. What do you do so outside of the Joy of Cooking book that you can use as a trigger? How do you remind yourself to live intentionally?
I think my writing practice has helped me tremendously because most of my subjects are my personal life, my family life, my spiritual life. I don't write a lot of fiction. I write mostly my own stories. Mm-hmm. And so when I am going somewhere, when I'm traveling, or when I'm taking a walk in nature, or having a conversation with my children or my grandchildren, it always reminds me that this is part of a story. And some of this could be something I would write down. I could use in another way. But it really helps me to be much more observant than I otherwise might be, just looking at it as all possible story material.
Yes. It sounds like you've taken these moments and integrated them into your lifestyle. Like you've kind of rigged the system, I like to put it. Like you put these constant reminders in place so that that's just how you live. You benefit from these reminders, from the material.
When I look at the blank computer screen, sometimes that's a powerful reminder. It's like, well, there had to have been something that happened.
Yes. But the things that you're writing about becomes, just a reflection, right? You're reflecting on what you've actually done. So that's at any given point, it seemingly is accessible to you.
Yeah. And others, which is what's so interesting about it. I think about my blog. Sometimes someone asks me to define it. And I said, it's an interactive diary because I write for public consumption, right? I have people who follow the blog and people who comment on the blog. So it is it's my deep thoughts or sometimes my shallow thoughts, but my thoughts, and people respond. So there is that interplay that I think is so awesome, because many diarists, it's under lock and key, and that's fine. And no one will ever see it, and it gets burned, or whatever.
Mhm.
But I've always been much more of a public person and much more of a sharer, maybe an oversharer, but I do share a lot. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so this comes right into our next question about the habit. You said about 12 years ago, you started blogging. What form did that initially take?
Well, I set up a blog. I remember my very first blog post ever, which was in, I guess that would be 2011. And it was a fun family story about going on a hike. And all I'm terribly unathletic. I mean, horribly, horribly unathletic. And I know you and your wife are very athletic, but I hope this does not take me down too much in your estimation.
No, not at all.
I am really not. I'm not a runner. I'm not a ball player. But I was trying to go out and do a hike with the gang, all 5 kids and my husband. And anyway, it was a catastrophe, but it was a funny catastrophe. So I wrote about it. And then I thought, okay, I can do this next week. And then what happens with me is I'm I'm pretty harsh on myself a lot. So in other words, when I set something up, I don't want to stop it. I don't want to let myself down. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this once a week, then I'm doing it once a week. So I've never missed a week. And in fact, every November, I do 30 posts, 1 per day. There is something, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called NaNoWriMo. It's National Novel Writing Month. Well, for years, they had something that was sort of a spinoff called National Blogging Month, where you were challenged to write a blog post every day. So I got into that. And so every November now, starting November 1, I write a 500-word blog post every day. And talk about your marathon. It is exhausting. Wow. By the end of that month, my brain is mush. I can't ever think I'll ever come up with another topic again.
Yeah.
And then I give myself that first week of December to just regroup. And then I'm back to the 1 a week. But it's been a great, great thing for me.
Yeah. I was wondering about the recovery week, right? As we might call it in marathoning, right? Is that first blog post after November, is it typically picking up the pieces and just kind of a recovery or a response to that?
Yeah, it is. It really is. I will reflect back on the month before, but I do give myself a little grace on that first one back.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. That's good that you did it. Well, I imagine that you giving yourself grace allows you to sustain this practice that you've done for so long now.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And they're not all gems, Joe, by far. But what's been nice about them is I've been able to repurpose a lot of my pieces into publishable work. I've written a lot for spiritual magazines. I'm a Lutheran. Living Lutheran magazine is a big magazine. And sometimes I'll take the nugget of a blog post and I'll say, wow, I could really, expand on this. And I could sell this article to a newspaper or a magazine. And I do that a fair amount. So it's been kind of nice because not only for me and my immediate blog audience, but sometimes it has takes on a second life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So. I really love hearing how you've integrated just this practice into your personal. It's personal, professional. There's really it's just you. It sounds like like a very simplified practice or simplified approach to living the way you want to live. Is that overstating it?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I teach writing classes to non-writers or people who fancy themselves as non-writers.
Yes, who do not identify as writers.
Identify as writers. Yes. And I will say you are a writer. You were born with a pen in your hand, whether you know it or not. And, you can make your story beautiful. You can make your story what you want it to be. So I try to, practice what I preach in that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. It sounds like it. Can you talk a little bit more about the interactiveness of the diary? You called it an interactive diary. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm writing it for me. Mm-hmm. I'm writing about very personal things a lot, but I'm also writing it with the expectation that it will be read and that it will be responded to. And I've had really only one time in all the, whatever this is, 12, 13 years, the only one time that I had an unpleasant interaction based on a blog post I wrote. Yeah. And it was a shocker. It was, to backtrack a little bit, in 2005, I was in my 40s and I was approaching menopause. And all of a sudden, I started to have some very strange feelings and symptoms and had no idea what was the matter with me. But it turned out that I had bipolar disorder, and I would be manic for days, weeks at a time, which meant no sleeping, no, very little eating, screaming all the time, wired, writing like a nut, just completely out of control. And the symptoms go on and on, but they're very upsetting symptoms. And then I would crash, and then I would be depressed, and I couldn't get out of bed. And this would go back and forth and back and forth for like a year and a half. So at any rate, long story short, I did get, thank God, I did get to a psychiatrist. I did get on medication. I've been stable for, ever, for 17 years now. But one time I had written about going off my meds, which almost everyone does sometimes because you start to feel fine again and nobody wants to be on medication like that.
Sure.
So I stopped, and I lasted about a week, and then I just crashed, and I was so depressed and could not stop crying. Went to my psychiatrist, and I was so ashamed, and he was so great. And he said, please don't be ashamed. This happens all the time. Now you know what you need to do. So I wrote about it, not thinking that there'd be any significant fallout at all.
Sure.
And someone that I knew kind of really was very critical and very hurtful. Like, basically, you should have known better. Why did you do that? And it really affected our relationship, and it brought me up short because I thought maybe I shouldn't be this honest. But
sure, you would question that. Of course you would. Yeah.
Yeah, but then I went back to being honest. And I but that was that moment of like, oh my gosh, somebody read it and took it the wrong way. Wow. So the way you get to the point where you're so used to the interaction that you almost forget that that you really do have people who are actually reading and thinking about what you're writing.
Right. Yeah.
So you feel like you got a responsibility. And I always do say this, because I write a lot about my kids and now my grandkids, I try to be super, super careful and super respectful of their privacy. And if I want to tell a funny story, I always vet it with them, or at least most of the time I will. I'll say, oh, this is when Rose was 4 years old and she thought all the seagulls on the beach were the Holy Spirit. And she would chase them going, look at all those Holy Spirits, which I thought was a really cute little story.
Cute.
Right. But, but I said, is this okay? And 99% of the time they say fine, but I feel a responsibility to them. I'll never publicly or intentionally embarrass them. It's not worth it.
Yeah. Wow. That's some great foresight. I don't know that everyone would give that amount of thought, not out of malice, but I'm wondering, were you always thinking this way? Were you always aware of how it might be? Or did something perhaps happen where someone didn't appreciate that there was an overshare?
Well, there have been one or two times, I think, where one of the kids has said, wow, gee, Mom, thanks for telling about the time I fell off my bike and blah, blah, blah. But most of the time, no, they're absolutely fine with it. But one thing that did strike me was I went to a writers' conference many years ago, and and the speaker was the parenting editor of the Washington Post. And she was great. And she said, look, if you're going to write about your kids, just be aware that whatever is in print is forever. So if they're looking for a job, or they're applying to college, or maybe a future romantic interest or friend, can look them up and find this. Think carefully before you add to their profile, as it were, their public profile. So I already kind of felt that, but that really cemented it for me. Was, oh gosh, how would I feel, if something about me that was not quite so flattering was just, and out of my control, was just out there, thanks to good old Mom. So
good old Mom. Yeah.
It really reinforced that.
Does it in any way filter your original thoughts, or do you put that filter in after you have done your writing and then ask yourself, does this pass the check?
You know what? That's an interesting question, Joe. And I will say that sometimes it's early and sometimes it's late. Sometimes right away, I'll think, wow, this is kind of a hot button topic here. And we're going to go into it. And then other times I'll write it and then I'll go back and I'll think, ooh, Evan might not be so thrilled with that. I better check with him. kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And
I
the
think
kids
that's
have
great.
different. I have 5 kids, and they have different tolerance levels.
I'm sure. And my wondering too is, do their tolerance levels or their perspectives shift as they go through their own lives, right? Are they more open to different shares versus, that would be interesting. In particular, those who have the children who are your grandkids. I wonder, if they have a different lens. I imagine they would. But
Yeah,
it
they
seems
do.
like you've navigated this pretty openly. It sounds like you've been very upfront with your process and your thoughts, and it sounds like that's been very beneficial.
For the most part, it has been. And my daughter, my older daughter, is a writer. She's not a professional writer, but she writes. She has her own blog, and she's absolutely so talented and so great, and writes completely differently than I do. But in her own way, she's just as brutally honest. And she doesn't always check with me before she writes about me, but that's okay. But it's great. I love it. I love the fact that she expresses herself that way.
Mhm.
And so there's the writing bug is sort of in the family. All of my kids are good writers, all 5 of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Not that you're biased or anything. You wouldn't
No,
say that. Yeah. Yeah.
no, I
Yeah. Okay.
really no.
Okay.
Everyone says it, Joe. Everybody,
Everyone I know. I believe
everyone
it. I
I
believe
know.
it. Yes. 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 Of course. So, what have you said no to that has made a significant impact in your life? You said something to the effect of know when it's time to go.
Right. No, when it's
Where
time
does
to go.
that come from?
Well, I always think of overstaying your welcome at a party or overstaying your welcome as a house guest. Or I tend to be the one who will leave before that happens. Sometimes I'll leave too early. I'd leave them wanting more or
Yeah.
whatever. And my husband and I began performing children's theater and writing our own material. Many years ago, we founded the Rehoboth Summer Children's Theater at the Delaware Shore in 1982. So that's 40 years. And I was in my early 20s and he was young, and we were writing funny parodies of children's classic stories. And so, he was Prince Charming and I was Cinderella, or I was Peter Pan or whatever. And we just kind of kept going. And part of it was, that was our living, right? So I kind of
Mm.
had to keep going. So I would perform up until I don't know, 6 months of pregnancy. And I would just wear these loose dresses, and I'd think, and there's Dorothy on the road, on the yellow brick road. It was looking back on it, it was really kind of silly, but I don't think the kids noticed. I think the parents probably noticed after a while. But I got to a certain age, and I did say to Steve, it's been a great run, honey, but I can't do this anymore. And he's a character actor, so he's made it a long time past my prime, because I was always
Mhm.
Snow White, I was always the ingenue, I was always the cute little one, and that the shelf life on that is short, and
Okay,
so
because of the traits that one expects from those roles. Is that what you
yeah,
mean? Okay.
absolutely, absolutely. So, but he was great. He's marvelously supportive of me, and I'm sure he was a little sad, but it was time. And then the church job just happened right around that time, and I sort of segued right into that. So it worked
Yeah.
out. It worked out really well. But it was a real no that I had to say. I don't know that Steve would have said no to me. I don't think he would have said, "Honey, it's time for you to stop."
Yeah.
In other
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
I was me, I had to say it. And then just retiring from church last spring, people wanted me to go on. And I had been doing a tremendous amount of work in this job, teaching Sunday school, leading confirmation,
Mm.
taking 40 kids on high school mission trips every summer, leading vacation Bible school, leading adult Bible study. I mean, it was just so, so, so much. And I got to the point, especially with the mission trips, where, you're traveling, you're living in a rural area, you're sleeping on the floor, right? And you're chaperoning 35 to 40 high school kids. And the last trip we did just before the pandemic was to Puerto Rico. And I remember really waking up stiff and sore and irritable and
Yeah.
saying, this is not fair to the kids. It's time for me to stop this. So,
Yeah.
so knowing when to say enough.
Yeah. What do you mean it wasn't fair to the kids?
I think I don't want to say it's a young person's job, but I don't think it's an older person's job. I think
Mm.
there's a tremendous amount of physical energy that has to go into it.
Got it.
And as you age, even if you're aging gracefully, in your mid 60s, you're not the way you were when you were in your late 30s.
Sure.
It's just not happening. And so I hope that they're still looking for a replacement for me, but I'm hoping that they will go with somebody a little younger,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay.
But I mean, the kids were always great. They never complained or acted
Sure.
like they weren't happy that I was there, but I
I'm
felt it.
sure of that.
I felt like I wasn't giving it, 100% anymore to the
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. I think it seems like you have a good sense about that for yourself. It's like
Yeah,
when something isn't totally feeling right, it sounds like you're not forcing it past a certain point. You're like, you know what? That's another opportunity for someone else. Leave them wanting more. Right. I like
exactly.
that idea. And now, what is the current thing you're throwing everything into? It sounds like what area in your life feels just about perfect? Maybe I'm making a connection with the grandkids.
That's perfect. I mean, it's just they live with us. It's such a joy. My oldest son is a composer, a classical composer, and so is his wife. And they have church music jobs as well as they're composing. And we have a big house that had been an empty house, and so they moved in with us, and it's just worked out so beautifully. And we are so delighted to have them with us. And they contribute to the household in a million ways. And I just have had the joy of being there for Aiden and Peter from the day they were born. And I just can't tell you how fabulous that is, to be able to be with those little guys every day. And I miss them when they're gone. My daughter-in-law is from Taiwan, and they didn't get to go for 3 years to see her family because of the pandemic.
Sure,
They
sure.
hadn't been since early 2020, and they finally went. And because it's such a long trip, it's 17-hour flight for
Right.
starters.
Yeah.
They were gone for 5 weeks, and she had the kids, took the kids out of school, and they all went because to see her family.
Sure.
And there was a week that it was like, oh, it's nice and quiet around here, and then the second week was, oh, it's nice and quiet around
Yeah.
here,
A little too
a
quiet.
little
Yeah.
too quiet. So really loved
Yeah.
having them come back.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Absence makes the heart grow fonder or something like that, right?
Something like that. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, so after 1 week, you had the realization 4 more weeks is a long time.
for sure, for sure.
Pretty significant. So now everyone's back
We're all back.
home
We're all
base.
back. But it's nice because we do go away enough. We're separated enough, that we're
Mhm.
not in each other's way
You're not
all
on
the
top of each
time.
other. Yeah.
Well, right. Steve and I are finally starting to travel, which we never could do when the kids were young. So we've been really trying to get away every year if we can.
Yeah.
And so in the fall we went to Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic for 2 weeks. And it was great. It was great being away. It was great having time with Steve. And I think it was good for the guys back home too. So we seem to know how to balance.
That's great. Yeah. Can I ask a little bit more about how you choose how to live intentionally in this phase of life? Because now you have, people back under your roof,
Yeah.
people went away and that
Other-
looked a certain way. And now people are back. And yet you and Steve are finding ways to do things, to take trips. How do you stay connected with making sure you're living the way you want to live in this phase?
Well, I think again, it's a lot of mutual respect that the
Mhm.
four adults navigate pretty well. I think we all have a good sense of humor, and I think we're all pretty boundaried. I really try never to interfere with the way the kids are being raised. They're being raised beautifully, by the way, but
Mm.
I just don't. This is their turn. I have my turn, and this is their turn, and that helps. And I always say that if I didn't have my daughter-in-law as the saintly, wonderful woman that she is, this would not work.
Yeah.
But she's a gem, and it's such a blessing that it really makes it work for us. For now, it works great. And
Yeah.
the other kids are living not far away, but none of them are ever going to come home.
Well,
We're just-
not as home as under the roof.
no,
That would be the same
no.
place, right?
Not at all. I mean, I have one in Seattle, and I have two in New York City. And my other son is out in way out about an hour from here. So, and they
Yes.
were very happy to be raised in this little suburb, and they've made it very clear that they'll be back for visits, pretty much. And that's it.
Good. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the listener, the casual listener here, where are you located, Elise?
We are in Orland, Pennsylvania, which is an immediate northwest suburb of Philadelphia. We're right outside the city limits.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great area.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a logistical question. If you feel comfortable sharing, do you do any sort of like family meetings, given that you have so many humans under your roof and some of them are adults?
Right. We don't have prescribed family meetings, but we eat
Hmm.
dinner every night together. So we're together and we talk things out when the boys are excused from the table after they finish eating. That's
Yeah.
our time. If something's come up that we want to discuss, usually that's when we'll do it,
Hmm.
or after they've gone to bed. But it's not formalized. But yeah, we definitely do keep the lines of communication very open.
That's great. And so thank you. The reason I'm asking is because there is this phenomenon that you may know exists in other families where, communication isn't so clear, and parents of adults with children have different feelings on how kids should be raised and different, mental models of how things should go. And it sounds like you've found a great way of navigating, so much so that you're able to thrive under the same roof. So do you have any, I don't know, maybe it's advice. Do you have any advice for folks who are in this dynamic in some role?
Well, I think that what I keep getting back to, Joe, is there for everything there is a season, right? And I had my season to be a mom to young children and to raise them as I saw fit, as my husband and I saw fit. And I will say that while I was kind of dissing my mom back a few minutes ago, one of the things she was really great at was appreciating me as a mom and being super supportive and non-critical and non-judgmental. And she really let me find my way. And I that is something that I'm always going to be grateful to my mom for doing, because several of my friends had very I won't say domineering mothers, but very opinionated mothers. And
Sure.
as they would start to have their families, mom would be on the phone telling them, that they should be doing this with the kids or not doing that, or the kids are involved with too many
Yes.
activities, or, their bedtime is too late. And I remember thinking, ugh, that's just awful.
Be that as it may, very common
Oh,
approach.
I know it's
Very
common.
common
Oh,
approach.
I know it's common. But I think
Yeah.
everybody deserves a chance to kind of do it their way, make their mistakes, do it their way.
Mhm.
And, you know, without too much interference from
Yeah.
the wise elder.
Yeah. Which
May
I,
not
I
be that
think,
wise.
well, no. I think effectively you become wise by living and having experience. So at a
Well, yeah.
minimum,
Yeah,
through
yeah,
lived
yeah.
experiences. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, no, that's phenomenal. Thank you. But you already used up the person you admire on Jane Pauley, and you can't try to pull your mom back in. So
Darn it. She
does
reminds
not
me a
count.
lot of Jane Pauley.
Well,
No, she
okay. All right.
doesn't. She liked
That
me.
was a
She
great.
enjoyed watching Jane Pauley when Jane Pauley was on the Today Show. There.
That is
That's
great.
the
And
connection. They
so
they
you know
like
what?
watching.
What am I doing trying to come up with transitions? You're the author here. Okay. You did a fantastic job. All right. For the editor, edit out anything that I said, and we'll
No,
just keep
no, no,
Elise's narrative.
no, no, no.
Talk to me about Jane Pauley, how she showed up for you, the whole story. It sounds like with your mom here.
Yeah. She I again, she's from Indianapolis, which is where my Steve was born and raised. So that's a little connection right there.
Mhm.
And she was an anchor on TV. I think she was on the Today Show by the time she was 25 years old. So she was super young.
Oh wow.
And to me, she always had that persona of being very friendly and open, smart, but not a know-it-all, had a great sense of humor. I just always admired her personally. And then as her career developed and she had some glitches, I thought she handled them with a lot of grace. And then in 2004, she wrote her memoir called Skywriting.
Mm.
And that's where she talks about her struggles with bipolar. And I remember reading it, and at that point I was not showing any symptoms, and it was maybe the first book I'd ever read on that subject, because people didn't talk about it back then.
Right.
People
Right.
didn't know what it was, and people weren't very open about sharing. So I
Sure.
remember
Sure.
reading it and thinking, wow, that really takes guts, to come out and say that. And then 2 years later, there I am with the
Wow.
same issues. And then I had to make the decision, am I going to be open about this or not? And when I was diagnosed, after hiding it successfully, so I thought, from the
Sure.
church for a year and a half, I wrote a letter to the congregation, and I said, this is what's been going on with me, for better, for worse. This is the reality. And I hope you all will understand and keep supporting me. But this is what I'm going through. And they
Yeah.
were, to a person, they were absolutely amazing. I mean, and people came up to me afterward and said things like that I had known for these people for, 15 years. And they'd say, I struggle with depression, or my wife, I think she has bipolar, or, all of a sudden they're telling me their stories and they're feeling as if they can share their stories with me, which was such an honor. And you realize how many people do struggle with this, and there's still so much stigma, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
just so horrible that people have to struggle with that as well as what they're struggling with their mental illness. So anyway, that's one of the reasons that I admire Jane Pauley. Plus, she's married
Yeah.
she's married to the guy who draws Doonesbury, so that's pretty perfect.
That's a really good reason to admire somebody, right?
Right
I
there.
think that's fabulous. That's so good. Well, before we get too far off on Doonesbury, it sounds like a great gift that you were able to provide the fellow members of your congregation to give them permission almost to open up and speak out a little bit. That vulnerability that you expressed sounds like it was beneficial to everyone.
Well, I thank you. I have come to believe, as much as I sometimes think I overshare, I think the vulnerability does give people permission to be vulnerable as well. And I think that can only be a good thing.
It sounds fantastic, and there's that common thread again. Back to your blogging and the way that you express yourself and open it up for being interactive. And I'm going to come back to that actually, because I'm wondering, what do you consider your responsibility is to viewers, readers of your blog, if any?
Honesty is a big one. Try to approach everything as plainly and clearly and honestly as I can. I try not to dwell too much on very negative things. I try to keep things positive, even when I'm talking about something that's a difficult subject. I try to always end on a note of hope. I use humor a lot just because I like to be funny. And I think it really hopefully it elevates the mood. I think this world is a tough enough place, especially nowadays. We really don't need people continuing to okay, you think you're feeling bad now? Well, read this. Then
Right.
you're really going to be depressed.
Yeah.
So I think that is a bit of a commitment that I've made, not to be a Pollyanna and pretend things are always rosy, but to look at it as, gee, we're what's that wonderful quote that everyone's quoting all the time now? I think it's Ram Dass saying we're all just walking each other home. That's what life is, just all walking each other home. And it's true.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So, what do you imagine some people admire about you? Imagine, and also you've been told, so you don't have to imagine as much.
Who knows? People pick different things, sometimes someone will say, gee, I think that, your sense of humor is great. And then other people will look at them like, oh, Elise is funny? Really? You think she's humorous? So humor is such a incredibly individual thing,
For sure.
everyone has their idea of what's funny or not. But I would like to think that people might admire the fact that I raised the kids pretty well with Steve. I'm very, very proud of them. They turn out to be wonderful human beings, and a lot of that is not to my credit. But I like to think that I didn't stand in their way as they were growing and blossoming to be who they were meant to be. And always been a big cheerleader and, help them as much as I could with opportunities. They're all very musical, always made sure they had lessons, etc., that kind of thing. So yeah, I think, I think maybe people think that I was a pretty decent mom, pretty decent at my job at church. But it's funny when you say admire, sometimes they put you on a pedestal and it's so uncomfortable, because we would sit in church on a Sunday morning, and it's all the kids all in a row and the little nice dressed up. And one of the moms said, oh, you make me feel so bad because my kids were fighting in the car, and you've got it all together. And I said, you know what? Next Sunday, I am going to videotape my family getting ready for church. You will feel so much better because they were, I'm not going. You can't make me go. He's wearing my shirt, make him take it off, everything.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to get myself down from that pedestal because that's not helpful to anybody. And, be honest and say, you know what, we all struggle with this.
Yeah.
It's not easy,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
rather than be admired, I guess maybe I would prefer people just identified
To
with
be
me.
relatable.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's admirable to want to be relatable. How about that?
There we go.
There you go. I think you can have it all. I do.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
You can let other people put you on the pedestal. You don't have to, be on your own. I think that's okay. Elise, what else would you like to share in the name of intentionality? What other thoughts do you have that you like to bestow or get into?
Well, I think life is just this amazing gift that we've been given, and none of us know how long it's going to last. One of the formative experiences in my life was the loss of my sister, who was killed in a car accident when she was 23. And she was just 11 months younger than me. So we were very, very close. And I have really tried to live the rest of my life through the lens of what did Maureen not get a chance to live? I want to live a good life. I want to experience as much of life as possible. And I want to do good in the world. And because she was a wonderful person who did so much good for others. And her life was so tragically cut so short that in a way, I feel like I owe it to her. I don't know, that sounds strange, but I feel like I owe it to her because I've had all these extra years. I've had 40 something years without her now to make her proud and to appreciate this life that I was lucky enough to be blessed with so many more years of. So I think if everybody could just take a step back and say, we are just darn lucky to be here. And it's the world's a mess and yes, but we all can make it better. And there are so many moments of joy and beauty in every day that we are so lucky to be here to experience and to share.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Do you mind if I ask a little bit more about Maureen?
Sure. I'd love to talk about Maureen. She was
fabulous. Well, the spotlight is yours. Please share.
Okay, great.
Share more.
Well, anyway, she was just a very special person. Very funny, funnier than me. If you can imagine.
I don't know about
hysterical.
that.
No, she was hysterically funny.
Out.
And she was a beautiful girl, and she was the sweetest, kindest soul ever. And there's nothing she wouldn't have done for her friends. Many stories of friends running out of gas in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night, and Mo getting in her car and going and rescuing them. And and when she died, it was so striking to me how many people contacted my other sister and myself years later to say what an impact Mo had on their lives. As a matter of fact, one really strange story, when I wrote my first book in 2010, a couple of years later, I was contacted by one of Mo's former boyfriends, that they had dated, 40 something years ago. And he said, and we had never kept up. He didn't even know that Mo had passed away, but he was in New Jersey at his dentist's office. He's sitting in the waiting room, and someone had left a copy of my book on the table. He picked it up, started to read it, and realized that Maureen was the one I was talking about, was my sister. And he found me.
Wow.
And he contacted me, and he's an actor. And so he was off Broadway, and my daughters and I went up to see him perform, and I hadn't seen him in 40 years. And that was one of the most wonderful nights because we stood backstage after the show, and Michael shared stories about some of their silly, funny dates that they went on and some of the things that Mo had said that I never knew. I had never heard. So it was almost like getting her back and having my daughters hear about Aunt Maureen and stories that I never could have told them because I didn't know.
Yeah.
And she wrote letters. She was a prodigious letter writer, and she was living in Atlanta, Georgia. And Steve and I were doing children's theater up in the Northeast, and she wrote a lot to me. And I was so thrilled and happy that I saved all the letters. I saved them in a box, never knowing, that she wasn't going to make it. And so I kept them all these years. And for the 40th anniversary of her death, I went to Staples and I had 5 copies made of all the letters and bound and gave them to my 5 kids. So now they have the letters.
Fantastic.
And the letters really are very, very, very descriptive of the person she was. So that was such a gift to be able to share with them.
Yeah. What a great
But I
memory
do.
and artifact to have.
Yeah, but I miss her. The world is not as great of a place without her in it.
Well, it sounds like she's still very much a part of it. Very much so.
Yeah.
Right. It
Yeah.
sounds like I imagine you think of her often.
Many, many times a day.
Yeah.
And in fact, I named my oldest daughter Maureen after her, Maureen Rose. And I thought about that. Was that the right thing? Was that fair? Because there is this larger than life, dear departed Aunt Mo, and now this little girl's got this name. And I think she did struggle with it some. And when she was a junior in high school, she went to Thailand for a year as an exchange student. Okay, so she lived in Thailand for 1 year and 16. And when she came home, she said, I am Rose. I am not Maureen anymore. Please call me Rose from now on. And mixed emotions, sure. But I really wanted to honor that. And my sister Mo would have been all for it. And so now she's Rose and she's her own Rose. And it's wonderful.
Such a Maureen thing to do.
It's such a Maureen. It's such a Maureen thing to do. It is.
Maureen's in your family. I'm telling you. Right?
You know.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I
Sure.
really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Elise, what more? There's got. I don't even know where to go next. There's other pieces here that I want to unlock, but I also want to be respectful of your time.
Well, this has been delightful. It really has been, and again, I think we've covered the waterfront, at least a large chunk of it, and and again, the only takeaway that I would reiterate was, would be for people to feel that they have a story that they're living. And it's their unique story, and they have the power to shape it and make it something wonderful and special, and to try not to let it to be cast onto the waves of life, and be buffeted without any control, because there's a lot we can't control for sure, just period. Sure. But of the things that we can, I think we really should try to at least write an honest and compelling and unique and great story for ourselves.
Love it. That's very powerful. That's a good one to end on. So I'm not going to ask you any more questions. Elise, thank you so much for the time, for sharing your stories and your experiences. I really have enjoyed getting to know you that much better.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
This has been Intentionally Ever After, hosted by intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek. If you would like to have your own intentional conversation with Joe on or off the air, visit intentionallyeverafter.com. Thanks for listening.